3 years ago, I made one of my most popular videos on my channel talking about a camera that I still don't hear a lot of people talking about today. You may have heard of this camera's bigger brother that's been used on movies like the Mission Impossible franchise, but this camera specifically, you don't really hear about it being used very often. So today, 3 years into using it, I wanted to make a follow-up to that video to tell you what I still think about it and if it's still worth buying today. And that camera is this one right here. The ZCam E2 M4. Let's talk about it. Now, I don't know about you, but most camera review videos that I watch are very good at talking about the details of a camera, its codecs, its resolutions, why something's really good, the age-old argument about color science and brand loyalties, and every other reason that somebody would give you to hate on another company and to buy their brands. But I don't really feel like disparaging those other companies because I think that every camera that's been made probably since 2015 on is going to be a good entry point into making videos if that is your entire goal. The reason I want to talk about this camera is because it is a very specific use case for the type of work that I want to do, and it has a lot of capabilities and features that cameras at its price point do not have. And that's really what I want to talk about today, is why would you ever buy a Chinese-made third-party camera that nobody has ever heard of? But there's a couple of really good reasons why you should, and maybe a couple that you shouldn't. So let's dive into those here. First things first is you can't avoid the form factor. This right here is the base package that you would probably need to make this thing run. And this is the first point that I really want to talk about with this camera. The form factor of this camera is unlike any of its other rivals. You get a Blackmagic 4K, you get yourself even the Pixus, which is going to be the new competitor to this camera. This form factor, there is no other camera company in the world, I believe, that is doing it to this size, this effectively. And since we're talking about form factor, I know I don't have it set up for this right now, but this is one of the easiest cameras to balance on a gimbal due to the fact that its mass is all right in the center. You don't have a wide body like a DSLR or like the Blackmagic. You don't have to do counterweights or anything to that manner. I still use the original DJI Ronin S as my main gimbal, and I use it for vehicle rigging and I use it for regular gimbal use, and this camera, without doubt, is the easiest system to put on there. And if you've ever used a DJI Ronin S, you know that they are a pain in the ass to balance. And speaking of balancing, that brings me on nicely to my next point, which is that the lensing options that you can put on this camera are nearly endless. This camera comes standard with a micro four thirds lens mount. It actually holds in place with 4 screws right on the corners here, just like a Red Komodo would. And ZCam themselves offer the micro four thirds mount. They offer an EF speed booster mount, which is what I have attached right now to get my Canon glass on it. And you can even go all the way up to a PL mount. But that's what the beauty of this camera system is that if you get the lens mounts for the EF speed booster, for the PL, and for the micro four thirds, it doesn't matter what camera system or what size sensor you have, whether it's the full frame 8K, the Super 35 6K, or even the micro four thirds, the lens mounts will work between all of those camera systems, so you can swap and interchange between bodies and lenses and lens mounts really, really easily. When I need to swap this from a handheld mode like this or a tripod mode using the Canon glass, and I want to move to a lighter lens to work on my gimbal setup, it's a matter of the 4 screws in the corners, pop it off, put the micro four thirds lens mount on it, and you're good to go. Lighter system, lighter glass, works great. And this right here is about as minimal of a setup as I was run, and as a matter of fact, I've run this camera this minimal a lot of times, and when you're shooting, say, a documentary for 10 to 12 hours a day and you have to be slinging this thing around, I don't need to have a massive shoulder rig. I don't need to have a lot of endurance to keep this thing around. I many times have just held this thing by the pistol grip on its side when I'm moving around, and being able to get this thing nice and tight onto your body like that, it gives you all the stabilization that you need. You don't have any micro jitters, and then you pair that with a nice lens like the 24-105 from Canon, something that has image stabilization, and it is hard to beat what this camera can give you out of the box. Another big factor that I really want to talk about that I don't think many people really put to the test is the weatherproofing of this camera. I'm going to tell you a quick story to demonstrate how good the weatherproofing of this camera is. Back in February of last year, I was working on a spec documentary project to showcase backcountry ski resorts and kind of how ski resorts came to be the way that they are today. One of our shoot days, we ended up shooting in upstate New York right after a massive snowstorm had come in, and I ended up bringing way too much gear for that shoot. It was one of the first documentary shoots where I wasn't given a prescribed shot list, so I wanted to make sure I had everything with me for whatever shots that I need. So I'm wearing a 40-pound camera bag with way too much gear in it, a snowboard attached to that, and on top of that, there was no chair access at this resort that we were at, so we had to hike up the mountain ourselves to get to our shoot locations. I had snowshoes on with all of this gear and camera in hand, and had to try and figure out a way to snowboard down the mountain while I was getting shots. I think you can already see where this is going. Needless to say, that weight and that gear got the better of me, and I ended up going face first into the snow with my camera package in hand, and I ended up dunking this thing directly into the powder, and when I pulled it up, there was a snowball attached to the top handle of this camera, and I was thinking, my God, I have just ruined this thing. But I brushed everything off, see if it was still working, and sure enough, when I pulled it out, it was still recording, just like nothing had ever happened to it. The only problem I ran into was that the cable I was running from the SSD to the camera itself got wet in the contact points, so it was being a little bit fiddly to actually record footage after that, but pop a CFast card in, and it was good to go right after that. So that one case study for me is why I would never use any other system if I'm running a project for documentary, because I can throw this thing in the dirt, I can throw this thing in the rain, I can throw this thing in the snow, all of which I have done, and it will never take a licking. It will just keep going forever and ever. Another great feature that I love about this that I use all the time is the amount of codecs that it has, but not just high-end ones, low-end ones as well. If you get a camera like the Blackmagic 4K, your minimum recording option is going to be ProRes 422 LT, which even those files, yes, they're going to look good and they're going to do great, but they still are going to take up quite a bit of space on your computer, and if you don't have an Apple, you're not going to be able to play them back. It's a whole other set of problems that you don't even realize until you start getting into the workflow of how these cameras actually operate in an editing sense. The ZCam solves all of those problems because it has got codecs all the way from top to bottom, all the way from their Z-RAW that records up to 14-bit if you use an external recorder, all the way down to an 8-bit H.264 codec, and everywhere in between. H.264, H.265, ProRes, LT all the way up through HQ. When I use this camera for my own projects, I usually am shooting in H.265 because you get 10-bit color just like you would with ProRes 422, but you don't get the same file sizes, and you can play that footage back on your phone, on any player. H.265 is definitely the way forward, it seems, with YouTube and internet delivery. Unless somebody specifically requests it, like for a specific project, H.265 is the way to go with these guys. It gives you all the color that you need and none of the downsides of the file sizes. Another reason that I really like this camera, I kind of mentioned it before, is the batteries on it. A big problem with a lot of these cameras that you see, FX3, Blackmagic, 4K, 6K, all of its competitors, is that all of these cameras you almost have to run a V-mount battery system or a bigger battery system of some sort to be able to even operate them for any appreciable amount of time. This camera, with a couple of nice size NPF batteries, I have run an entire day off of just 1.5 of these batteries right here. And when you consider that, that is one of the best reasons to use this camera as a documenter or as a run and gun camera system, is because you're not constantly having to swap out batteries. You don't have to be changing 10 times a day, and I've shot ProRes 422 10-bit footage all day long with a battery and a half, and there really is no other camera that you can beat that kind of power usage. I am shocked at how well this thing performs, and that is one of the biggest contributing factors to why I like to use it. Still not convinced about this guy? How about built-in Wi-Fi control and wireless video transmitting into the camera system? I know that Canon has their Connect app and that Sony has a way to be able to control stuff from mobile devices as well, but the built-in functions in the app that this camera system has is easily one of the most intuitive and one of the best systems out there, in my opinion. There's a couple of things that are a little bit misleading in the menu system, especially when it comes to applying LUTs and to applying the color space that this thing shoots in. But when you learn your way around that and you buy a dedicated device to be able to control this, like I bought a $40 tablet from Walmart as my dedicated control and wireless video feed for this camera, when you do that, that capability is unrivaled in every other camera. So if wireless control and wireless video function without having to use a whole bunch of external monitors is really important to you, that is a very big selling point in my opinion on this camera. The last positive, and this is entirely subjective thing that I want to touch on, is I like the idea of it being kind of an unknown camera. People always ask about it, people are always curious to know what this thing is capable of, and there's just a bit of an aura around a camera that people don't see every single day. You know, it just makes it an extra point of conversation when you're with your filmmaker buddies having a beer after work, you know? If that's something that appeals to you, not that it really should, but if you are of that mindset, that's something to consider. Alright, so we talked about a lot of good factors about this camera and reasons that you should pick one up. Let's talk about a couple of reasons why maybe you shouldn't. I'll pick things up with where I ended off on it being an unknown camera. That might be just enough of a reason not to pick it up. An unknown brand and with an unknown potential can be a good thing if you know how to sell it, but if you work for production companies or you have technical specifications that you're supposed to hit that this camera doesn't fulfill, then that's enough of a reason to disqualify it. You know, there's lots of job ads that I see going up that say we need to have FX3 or A7S3 or FX6, and if that's what they're asking for, no amount of selling in the world is going to tell them that this is a good replacement for it, even if your specs are going to match. It's just not the same system. So that can be enough of a reason to disqualify it. Another downside on this camera, but kind of to be expected with this price performance range, is no built-in ND filters. Now, that is something that is exclusive to this camera system. If you step up to the F6 or the S6 version of this camera and above it, then you can get in the EF mount a module that slides right in between the lens and the sensor that gives you electronic ND control. And I personally haven't used it, but the fact that they offer a built-in solution without having to do filters in front of it is an awesome addition in my opinion. But even if you don't have that, you can just do what I do. Pick yourself up a Mirage matte box and have your built-in NDs right into the matte box. Pretty easy solution. Or get a screw-on filter in front. I've done both of those. Now, in my opinion, there's really only one big disappointment that this camera has that is something I always have to contest with when I'm shooting out in the field or even when I'm trying to lay out a shot, and it will come to bite you if you don't pay attention to it, and that is the dynamic range of this camera. I don't know what the advertised on it is. I think they advertised like 14 stops for this particular camera. It's nowhere near that. It's probably something like 12 stops, and when you point this camera towards a backlighted source, it is particularly noticeable. I've had it happen on a couple shoots before where we've aimed it towards windows for natural light as a backlight to our subject, and it kind of just makes the entire image a little bit too soft and a little bit too unusable. And when you don't realize it, like I said, you're going to lose some footage because it's bound to happen. But if you do know how to combat it, and you're using it either in a controlled environment like this, or you pair it up with good matte boxes and good ways to control the light that's coming into it, it is a problem that can be overcome. But do not let the advertised number of dynamic range stops on this camera fool you, because I guarantee you it is less than what they say on the site. Well, and that about sums it up. So, just to recap, here are the reasons you should buy it, in my opinion. You can use any lens system in the world that you want to with this. EF, E-mount, MFT, PL mount. They've got options for all of it. You can record externally and internally. You can power this thing off of the tiniest NPF battery you've got in your arsenal. It's got a million different codecs, and it is damn near indestructible when you throw dirt, water, rain, snow, anything you can imagine at it, and it'll still keep going. Two downsides: unknown pedigree and dynamic range. Those two might be big factors into why you don't want to pick up a camera system like this, but my original statement still stands, is that this is probably one of the best gateway cameras into doing professional video work. Now, if you're running your own company, you're doing video shoots for local businesses, you're producing your own short films, you're producing your own documentaries, that is exactly what this camera is amazing at doing, because it's going to give you a very easy way to learn a whole bunch of different systems and different terminology. You know, you're using shutter angle versus shutter speed in this camera system. You've got a lot of professional codecs that a lot of different camera systems are going to use, and you've got infinite adjustability on how this camera is set up with its custom buttons on the sides and on the back. And it's got quite a few professional ports once you do actually start to step up in the world. Like, this camera doesn't have a dedicated timecode port as it says on the back, but it has two control ports that if you get a proprietary cable, you can run Tentacle Sync timecode boxes off of this camera, and I've done just that on several documentaries that I've worked this camera on. And this camera is a great way to be able to get into this. My suggestion is, if you get something like this, use it for a year, use it on a bunch of different projects, and then step up either to the bigger sensor, get a full frame 6K of this camera, or step into a camera system that's going to be more widely recognized. You can upgrade from this to the Sony FX3, you can upgrade from this to the Red Komodo. The Red Komodo would be a great step up from this camera, as the form factor is going to be very similar between them. But ZCam as a whole, I would never stray away from it, just because the capabilities of this camera system, as long as you know how to work within its limitations, is almost second to none. And I've really enjoyed getting to use this camera, and I really enjoyed the results that I've gotten off of it. The footage has a certain softer quality. It's not as sharp as a Sony is going to be. It's even a little bit softer than a Canon might be in some scenarios, but it is a very capable system, and if your goal is to make your own video production company or make your own videos for just people in your town, hard to beat this system. Thank you very much for watching this video. I really hope you do enjoy it. If you want to see what my original thoughts of this camera were before I had a lot of miles and years under it, go ahead and take a look at the video up here. If you like what you see on this channel, my plan is to be making more videos like this in the future, just talking about kind of my impressions with my experience that I've got as I'm learning my way through this industry. I've done a little bit here and there. I've picked some things up as we go along and learned some things to do and not to do. So if learning some general filmmaking tips is something that you're interested in, stick around. We'll see what we cook up next. That's all I've got for today. I'll see you in the next one.